Welcome to this week's edition of Ask an MS Expert. I'm John Strum, and I'm the host of the Real Talk MS podcast. Each week, Real Talk MS reaches thousands of people in more than 100 countries around the world with the news that people affected by MS need to know. My wife, Jean, lived with progressive MS for 23 years, so I've had a front row seat experiencing all the ways that MS can impact a family. I'm a past member of the International Progressive MS Alliance Scientific Steering Committee, and currently I serve on the MS Society's Community Review of MS Research Committee. I'm a district activist leader and trustee for the National MS Society, and I chair the Society's California Government Relations Advisory Committee. The MS Society's Ask an MS Expert webcast is designed to give us a place for the MS community to connect and to connect you with experts who are ready to answer your questions on the topics that impact people affected by MS every day. Please feel free to post your comments and questions on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch. MS Navigators are online throughout today's program, answering those questions and connecting you to resources. Caring for someone with a chronic illness like MS can be deeply satisfying. But caregiving can also be physically and emotionally exhausting, especially for the person who's the primary caregiver. That person is most often a partner or a spouse, but they can also be a child, parent, or friend, all of whom will find their role as a caregiver made so much better once they learn to reach out for support. Joining us today to take on the often overlooked subject of caring for the caregiver are Tatum Fettig and Monia Joblin. Tatum is a member of the National MS Society's MS Navigator team, and she's also her daughter's primary caregiver. Monia was a care partner for her brother who lived with progressive MS for many years. Tatum, Monia, thanks for being with us today.
Great to be with you, John.
According to the AARP Public Policy Institute, there are 38 million family caregivers living in the United States who are caring for an adult. This equates to about 36 billion hours of unpaid care provided every year. Because of its unpredictable and progressive nature, some people living with MS will require a full or part-time caregiver. Of course, this varies from individual to individual. Like so many aspects of multiple sclerosis, no two situations look the same, and the scope of caring can be extremely broad. Tatum, what kind of care might a person with MS need from a care partner, and which agencies might become part of their support network?
Yeah, thanks, John. Everyone's needs, understandably, are going to be individualized to the care partner or caregiver, but there are often a variety of areas of care that a person with MS might need support from their care partner. Some of these needs may include physical care, emotional support, assisting with finding peer supports, care coordination with ongoing medical professionals, among many others. MS, as we know, is a very complex disease which often requires a comprehensive approach. And so this approach can often include the involvement of many agencies, resources, and supports. So physical care, for example, can include a medical support team who helps manage and support symptoms and also refers out internally or externally for rehabilitation or other medical supports. And this physical medical support team can really help the care partner not having to take on that medical role themselves. Our website has a great tool as well for finding doctors and resources if a care partner isn't sure where to begin that search. Physical care can also include home health for some or home care or respite care. And so sometimes medical insurance may or may not be able to assist with the payment of these based upon the individual's situation. And so, navigators here at the Society are happy to assist with resources if a care partner is curious and wants to learn more or is unsure where to begin that process. And then emotional support agencies or resources can include mental health professionals for some, could be a care partner connecting with peer support opportunities or helping their loved one support get connected with peer support. And that can include self help groups, online communities, and MS Friends program here at the Society. And the good thing to know is navigators here have the resources for care partner support on hand as well as on our website. So, multiple areas to search for these.
Monia, tell us about your experience as a care partner for your brother who was living with progressive MS. And tell us what sort of support network was in place to care for his needs.
Well, I arrived back home to help my parents take care of my brother. And they already had his care in place. It had evolved over time as his MS had evolved. By the time I arrived, he was bedbound. And so we had full-time nursing care during the day. Sometimes not a nurse, sometimes a CNA, because we did have to cobble together different schedules for different people. No one person helped us out 7 days a week. But we had a nurse who was basically the charge nurse, and she created his care plan. And then we filled in with other people from agencies. And then, of course, we and the family were there as well. So he was in pretty good shape in terms of coverage of care by the time I arrived. But I did have to learn how to negotiate and navigate agencies because people come and go. And as his MS became more advanced, it became more difficult to keep people because they often didn't want to help take care of somebody that required that much work. And so we had to interview a lot of different people to find the right ones.
One of the things that characterizes MS is how unpredictable it can be. We heard from Carlita, who has an adult daughter who's living with MS. Carlita says that some days her daughter can dress herself and manage the everyday tasks of daily living on her own. Then some days she can't. Carlita knows she may need to assume additional responsibility for some of these tasks when her daughter is experiencing a relapse. She also knows that her daughter values her independence. And Carlita is struggling to find the right balance of when to provide more versus less support. Tatum, what suggestions do you have for Carlita?
Yeah, I think just the realization that that's often an ongoing balance, but often open communication around needs, wants, and fears from both the person with MS and also the care partner. And sometimes asking for help facilitating these different difficult conversations. Some people bring in a third party to help facilitate this because often these aren't conversations that have been experienced before. And also, there's a lot of understandable difficulty in facing kind of that reality and having some of those hard conversations. I think care partners honoring and allowing choices while being consistent with their message that they're still there to support as needed, and allowing sometimes space and time if it's safe to cool off as frustration can arise, understandably, and if it's safe to do that. And then just remembering, a lot of people talk about self care, and sometimes that can feel like another task on the list to do. Um, but sometimes remembering that even 30 seconds, even if it's a breath or balancing this idea of balancing independence and interdependence can be really emotionally taxing and a very delicate balance. And so sometimes remembering to take breaks that don't have to be yet another task, but that can be built into the system that you already have that exists, and reminding yourself of that.
Well, I want to circle back to that self-care topic in just a couple of minutes. But first, let me ask you, Tatum, what are some common tasks that a care partner may need to take on either temporarily or permanently?
Yeah, it's not uncommon that the previous tasks and responsibilities can change or look different over time, depending upon the symptoms of the loved one with MS, and that can also understandably be unpredictable. And so this often means that the care partner can begin to take on new or more responsibilities. And for many, this can understandably feel overwhelming and can include some grieving in the transition process as well. And it's not uncommon that care partners sometimes might reach out for friends or family to help split up tasks from time to time just to try and alleviate the one person having this all, holding it up all themselves. Common tasks a care partner takes on might include household tasks that maybe they didn't do or participate in as much before, could be helping with daily activities. So that also could mean a career change or a career schedule change. Um, it could it could include some new care coordination tasks. So setting multiple appointments, keeping up with communication with providers, medication management, transportation coordination. That's kind of a whole nother care coordination role that could be new on top of the other daily tasks as well. Um, and those aren't uncommon.
When there's a lot to do, being able to prioritize becomes a necessity, especially when a caregiver's to-do list can change and evolve day to day. Monia, what was your experience when it came to prioritizing your caregiving tasks? And I'm hoping you might share some tips or strategies for prioritizing a care partner's to-do list.
Um, well, if as a care partner you have been in business, you've had a job, whether you've been a boss or you've had a boss, you've had to-do lists. And I would say transfer those skills that you had in the office to home, and that'll be helpful. Also, routine is very, very important because, yes, of course, MS throws unexpected challenges at you all the time. But if you have a routine, it's easier to go off the routine and improvise around the new challenges, and then come back to the routine rather than every day being something you have to make up. So routine is really important, and that can often revolve around the timing of medication, for instance. That timing can then dictate when other things happen around it. Planning ahead, of course, having your to-do list, but maybe building in some improv time during the day and taking advantage of rest time. When I was pregnant decades ago, my mother said, when the baby sleeps, take a nap. Well, that's kind of good advice for this role too. If the person you're taking care of is resting, take advantage of that time. Maybe use part of it to do your planning and do part of it to rest yourself.
Care partners who are also their care recipient's spouse or partner may face changes in their intimate relationship. Nick cares for his wife, who's living with primary progressive MS, and he's noticed a change in their relationship, both physically and emotionally. Nick says he often provides hands-on care and sometimes feels like he's more a nurse than a spouse. Tatum, what suggestions do you have to help Nick strengthen his relationship with his wife?
Yeah, so I'm always transparent that I'm not able to speak on this personally, but through talking with many constituents with MS and having the privilege to do so and learning from them, some themes that sometimes appear is remembering to ensure that both the person with MS and their care partner are both on the giving and receiving end of responsibilities. Sometimes it's natural that a care partner might come in and try and handle it all in an effort to relieve some stress, but remembering to allow both giving and receiving on both ends can be really important. Um, Making long-term plans and goals together. Sometimes this can be helpful for some, and it doesn't have to be a large vacation, though it could be. Even just going outside or getting a moment's break from all the providers and the appointments and the people contacting you, that can still be um, helpful in having some time just and some peace from all the daily tasks that often can add up. Also, keeping both in the decision making process, and that requires ongoing communication and self reflection and on the care partner's behalf, to remember that balance and keep that in mind as well. And seeking a healthcare professional can help with physical changes and symptoms too, so that you don't feel like you are a medical professional now and having to try and understand and explain all that too. So calling in help. And then couples counseling can also be helpful for some to manage emotional changes in this process and just be there. Sometimes people will have them for moments along the journey and then decide to go. To not have that, and then sometimes call them back in just with the unexpected day to day. That also makes good sense as well.
Monia, did you see your relationship with your brother change once you became his care partner?
Oh, drastically. First of all, in our case, we weren't very close as we were growing up. Our lives went in different directions. So this brought us back in a very dramatic way and very quickly. And that was the good part of it because we did have a relationship that we wouldn't have had otherwise. We found humor was so important. Being able to find the ridiculous things in some of the what otherwise could have been very challenging physical situations. I mean, you know, bathing your own brother is not something I had expected to do as an adult. But we found humor in a lot of things. We reminisced. We had a wonderful time as brother and sister. Um, uh, Communication strategies were involved, well, coordination. I think one thing that Tatum said that was so important was I involved him in things that he could still do. He loved to cook. I never knew that about him. And so he would both solicited and unsolicited give me lots of cooking advice. And I used most of it and it was really good advice. And that made us both feel good. But communication, yeah, that was the important thing. Trying not to be afraid to say certain things, to ask certain things. And he was never afraid to give me advice about how I should be doing this, that, or the other thing. So again, humor came in and helped me deal with that.
Living with MS means expecting the unexpected and focusing on what can be done rather than what can't be done. Tatum, are there any resources care partners can access to help them plan for an unpredictable future that MS may provide?
Yeah, the National MS Society is a great resource via phone call to get resources from a navigator for this. I think the energy going into trying to predict the future, it takes energy to do that. And so sometimes when something happens unexpectedly and you're trying to find a resource at the same time, that can add additional stress. So leaning on the society, whether it be online or a call to a navigator, can help you ahead of time figure out what resources might be out there. So should something unexpected happen, at least you have an idea of where to turn. In the society, we have a variety of resources. We have a Care Partner support resource list that's on our website. And it has a variety of resources, everything from a link where you can share updates in one update, but not on social media, to the whole group. And that can help with energy conservation. We also have, it has some technology tools that can help with that care coordination piece. And then we also have resources to help, for example, if someone was looking for home care or respite. So that's a huge resource that we have. And then we also have a more extensive guide and And so everyone has different needs and also resources information in different ways. And so this guide to support partners, it's definitely more in depth and more detailed. And so if somebody's looking for a longer read, that might be a good resource for them. And then just reminding people, I've probably repeated it enough at this point, but the navigators really are here to support. And so we have some great resources for care partners that we can send to. And oftentimes when we're talking with constituents, just trying to figure out how they best receive information, because sometimes if you're overwhelmed, getting a huge list can be overwhelming. And so a navigator can kind of help talk you through and narrow it down in hopefully a less overwhelming way as well.
Jamie tells us he recently left his job to become a full-time caregiver for his brother, and he's feeling the financial strain. Tatum, is there financial support Jamie can access to help alleviate the cost of caring for his brother?
Yeah, I would encourage him to give us a call and speak directly with one of us navigators, and we can help determine if there's benefits or resources that he may qualify for, and then we can give him information to directly connect him with these resources, which is oftentimes much more helpful than a random Google search. And so that personalized care and approach in finding the resources. And then in addition, it would be good for him and his brother to know that the society and other organizations are out there that may be able to provide some temporary or limited financial support for things like this. Um, and so, yeah, I would encourage it. It sometimes takes energy to reach out. It really can. Um, but oftentimes, in the long run, it can take less energy and you can get a more tailored um, support resources by reaching out to a navigator.
Jolie tells us she's been a care partner for her wife for almost 20 years, and she's beginning to feel burned out. Jolie doesn't want her wife to feel like a burden, but she feels like she's struggling almost daily, and she's worried that it's starting to show. Tatum, you mentioned respite care earlier. Can you explain what respite care is and share any respite services or other resources that might be available to help Jolie?
Yeah, so respite care allows for short breaks for care partners to get some rest, maybe spend time with a friend or family, do errands on their own, or maybe just sit and do nothing for a second, right? And so the purpose is to allow time for the care partner to get a break. These breaks can be really rejuvenating and allow Julie a chance to catch his breath potentially, as well as step outside being a care partner for just a second, even if it's for a brief moment, to just have a little break. And so joining peer support groups where you can meet others who understand the role of a caregiver, care partner, can not only provide you peer support, but also it can create a community that often is an untapped resource. Some of the best resources can be shared between care partners, people who've maybe experienced or interacted with a resource you haven't, but also it can help in terms of not feeling so alone and isolated. And so, um, utilizing that Care Partners resource list I mentioned earlier on the National MS website can be really helpful to get some ideas there as well.
And Tatum, how do home healthcare services work? And what steps might Jolie take to start that process?
Yeah, in general, home care or home health care comes into the house to assist with caring for the person with MS. And this often can include assisting with meals, light housekeeping, and really meeting the individual care needs for that specific person. I think it can be a process. I think that's good to be transparent about that. It can be an ongoing process. So finding is one thing, and then maintaining, right, which was mentioned earlier as well. So a first step would be calling medical insurance and finding out and getting a good idea of what benefits you may or may not have regarding this. And if they offer coverage, inquiring about a list of approved providers that may be able to offer this care. And then it becomes the task of a certain amount of care coordination of reaching out and finding out what providers are in the area. Also, if there's anyone available, and if so, what their availability is. And so that does take some time, and I think that's just good to be honest and upfront so that people aren't surprised by that and dealing with it at the same time. And the second step, if they're not able to find anyone in and their insurance isn't able to cover this, you may want to reach out to a navigator who could assist with providing the help with this. Or if the thought of it is just overwhelming, sometimes starting the conversation, learning about it, that's just part of starting the process. And it does take time. And so that's another option. But a conversation with a navigator about the different ways you can pursue coverage for home care or home health care. We, as navigators, provide lists of home care or home health providers or respite resources nearby them based on a zip code search. And so it can kind of give a place to begin the search instead of, recreating the whole thing on your own. And we encourage you to call and speak with a navigator about this process if you have any questions, or if the thought of it is so overwhelming and you just want to start the conversation as well. Navigators are here for that.
Monia, a moment ago, Tracy mentioned the isolation that caregivers often experience. Were there other family members or friends you leaned on while caring for your brother?
Yes, there were a number. I will be honest and say that as his disability progressed, some friends dropped out of that role. And we just had to say to ourselves, well, it's not about them, it's about us, and go on. But yes, we did have friends who would come by. We had special times of the year, of course, holidays, New Year's Eve, Thanksgiving, birthdays. We had friends who would routinely travel some distance to show up or make that special FaceTime call. And it was just a wonderful, bright part of the day, which also alleviated the isolation somewhat. I would say that if you have friends who you can rely on and who do want to help step in, I would have them come in and get familiar with your routine earlier rather than wait for a crisis, so that they know what they're doing and they feel confident, because people feel very responsible. They don't want to make a mistake and hurt somebody. So I think that's an important thing to do. We also had friends who would just drop in the afternoon and break up the tedium for Alan, and sort of get the nurse out of the room and just have fun with him.
Well, you both shared some excellent insights about how care partners can find support so that they can bring their best selves to care for their loved one with MS. Now, I'd like to ask you each to share one key takeaway that you'd like our viewers to remember. Tatum?
Sure. Yeah, I think I, as a mom and a caregiver, I used to get a little annoyed when people would tell me self-care, self-care, self-care. But I realized once I dug into that I was looking at it as a huge task. And my one takeaway would be taking care of yourself doesn't have to be fancy or expensive or elaborate. It literally can include looking out the window for a minute uninterrupted. And so some rest versus no rest is still something. And reminding yourself of that and giving lots of grace to yourself.
And Monia, how about you? You have one key takeaway that you'd like our viewers to remember?
I have two, if I may, but I'll make them quick.
You may.
One is the importance of communication. Just can't say it enough. And Tatum talked about the difficulty sometimes of breaching those very sensitive topics. But do it. It'll be worth it. And everybody is scared. MS is very scary. And just dive in, and it will be worth it between you and the person you're taking care of, and it will make that bond even richer and stronger. The second thing is routine, and that does get also to the self-care, because if you've got a good routine, you can plug into that routine. Part of the routine is your self-care, is the time, whether it's to take a walk, or if you can, go get a massage or watch a movie or whatever you're going to do, but build it into your routine.
Well, I want to thank everyone who submitted some great questions, and thank you, Monia and Tatum, for being with us today. Before we close, I want to remind you that the National MS Society's MS Navigator team is your best partner when it comes to connecting you to the very best information and resources on living with MS. You can reach an MS Navigator by phone, email, or through the Society's website by chat. For information and resources on MS, please be sure to visit the Society's website. You'll find research updates and news, information on connection programs like self-help groups and MS Friends. You'll hear about ways that you can get involved, and you'll find out about upcoming events that are taking place near you. Remember, you can connect with the National MS Society and others affected by MS on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And I hope you'll join me every week on the Real Talk MS podcast, where I continue the conversations that we start here. You'll find Real Talk MS at realtalkms.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. I'd like to thank Monia and Tatum for joining us today. Please remember that a recording of this webcast will be available at the Society's website at nationalmssociety.org/MSexpert, as well as on Facebook and YouTube. I hope you'll join us at this same time for next week's edition of Ask an MS Expert. You can always find our upcoming program topics on the National MS Society's website. And now I have a favor to ask each of you. Getting your feedback on today's webcast is important. So if you're watching on Facebook Live, you'll see a link to a survey pinned to the comments section. On YouTube, you'll find that link in the program description. And on Twitch, you can find that link in the chat. Completing the survey makes a real difference. The information you provide helps us continuously improve, and it helps shape future programs. The survey takes just 1 minute, so I hope you'll take a minute to fill it out. On behalf of Monia Joblin, Tatum Fettig, and the National MS Society, I want to thank you once again for joining us. Please stay safe and make healthy choices.